All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Emily, and I'm the Marketing Director for Clinkscales Elder Law Practice. We are a firm with main offices in Hayes and Wichita, and we serve clients everywhere in between. It really focuses on helping clients answer questions and issues regarding aging, chronic illness, long-term disabilities, and more. So we are very excited to bring you this webinar today entitled If the Diagnosis is Dementia. Please feel free to send any questions that you may have to me in the chat box that's located at the bottom of your screen. At the very end of this presentation, we will address any of those questions that you may have. Also, if you have any additional questions you'd like to discuss with Randy or a member of our staff, we will open up our breakout rooms afterwards. So what that means for you is that you'll have a chance to speak privately with a member of our staff about your unique situation, or just have us address any burning questions that you may have. At the conclusion of this presentation, we will also send out a quick survey link in that chat box where you can fill out your information in order to request your free book or your free strategy session. So without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Randy Clinkscales and get us started.
Thank you, Emily. And before we do get started, just wanted to be sure that you can see the screen. Sometimes I kind of mess this up. So if you can see the screen, it says, if the diagnosis is dementia, if you would just type Y in the chat box, and then Emily will see that and let me know if anybody's having any problems. In addition, if you are having trouble getting on completely and can't even get into the chat box, call our office at 785-625-8040, and we'll try to get you over to Emily to sort it out. So I'm Randy Clinkscales, and today we're going to talk about if the diagnosis is dementia. And we're going to be talking about strategies for the care and communication with somebody with dementia, as well as the legal planning that you need to do, and how to pay for care. So today, you're going to discover ways to care for and communicate when dealing with dementia. So let me explain that just a little bit. We're really talking about two things. One is how to care for the person who's the caregiver, and then also how to communicate with someone who has dementia. And then the second thing is that we're going to talk about protecting yourself with important legal documents. And again, we're talking about two things here. We're talking about protecting the person with dementia, but also protecting the family and caregiver with appropriate legal documents. And then the third thing we're going to talk about is how do you pay for care? So is this the right workshop for you? It is if you or someone you love has been diagnosed with dementia, or you're concerned about developing dementia, or if you're caring for somebody with dementia, or if you're wanting to learn ways to communicate effectively. If you're a caregiver, most likely you're getting overwhelmed, and this is a good workshop for you. If you don't have a plan in place that addresses the impact of dementia, then this is where you need to be. If you're wondering how to pay for long-term care if it's necessary, or if you're concerned about losing everything to long-term care cost, we're going to address those issues today. A lot of times when I visit with families, I'll spend about the first hour visiting about the healthcare issues, and then talk about the financial situation, caregiver issues, and like. And then I ask them to tell me what their goals are, or if you will, have them imagine if they could wave a magic wand. And so these are really the responses that I get, and it's almost universal. To be able to care for a loved one at home, to have a legal plan in place that specifically addresses the unique issues facing somebody with dementia or a family dealing with dementia. Being able to pay for care without losing everything. Protecting your property and income for your spouse, your children, and others. And I always want to be careful about using this phrase because I think it gets overused, but peace of mind. And I think if there's any area where peace of mind is important, it is in the area of dementia care. So having peace of mind that everything is going to be okay and that you're not alone. So many people that are dealing with dementia are going day to day. They're trying to get to the end of that day. And it's hard for them to think that there's going to be a sun up the next day. And so many times the caregiver feels isolated and alone. Many times they are. I'd like to share with you one of my clients' story. And so let me tell you a little bit about Tad. Tad came to us quite a few years ago and was with us for several years. In fact, he's still with us. His wife passed away, but we still oversee Tad's care. But let's talk about what happened. He came to us when his wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And let me just read this. When my wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I tried to care for her myself. My son, a doctor, told me I had to get help or we would end up with two sick people. My banker recommended Clinkscales. Clinkscales helped me helped me care for myself and my wife. They helped monitor my care and my wife's care. If I ever had a question, I just had to pick up the phone. And then finally, he said, I never could have done this without you. As I said, Tad's still with us. His wife passed away, but he did a great job of taking care of her at home. And then when she did have to transition to a nursing home, Tad did a great job, and it was a thrill getting to work with him. And now Tad's older, not working, and so we still continue to monitor his care and check in with him. But he's really pretty healthy for, I think Tad's in his mid 80s and close to 90. I want to, again, the thing that jumps out at me and this testimonial from Tad is I had to get help or we would end up with two sick people. I want you to know that after I did this talk this morning, one of the people on the call contacted me afterwards and said I described his grandparents. And he told me about his grandmother spending all her money, all her resources, and all her energies trying to take care of his grandfather with Alzheimer's. And then he finally died, and then she died 2 days later. And so they ended up just having one funeral for both of them. But she was totally exhausted and really needed help, but it would never reach out for that help. And so it ended up, with both of them passing. So who am I? I'm not sure why Emily chose to pick a picture of a chimpanzee, but maybe that says something about me or whatever. I am an elder care attorney. What does that mean? I work with people with aging and chronic care issues. We also work with families protecting their assets for long-term care. We have offices in Hayes and Wichita, but really clients throughout the state, particularly in the western half or the western 2/3 of the state. This is actually my 41st year of practice. The last 16 years have been the best, and I'm going to get in that in a minute because I've been able to start working with older folks and people with chronic illness. And I want you to know a little bit about my background with Alzheimer's and dementia. I'm a founding member of the National Alliance of Attorneys for Alzheimer's Planning. I served last year and this year on the governor's Alzheimer's disease task force and helped draft the task force plan that now we use in Kansas. I'm a founding member of the Life Care Planning Law Firm Association, where we provide a level of services where we have care coordinators that work with our clients that have issues such as Alzheimer's. We have two social workers and one nurse on staff that works with our families that are facing those type of chronic illnesses. I just wanted to share this, and I would really just want you to see this. This is actually me and my family. I have 3 sons. I have a daughter-in-law, Kaylee, holding my youngest grandson, Max, who we interrupted his nap time for this photograph, and then my best buddy, my 3-year-old grandson, Alex. So we were able to get together to get this photograph, and they're kind of a joy for me. So why am I so passionate? Because I think that's important. And let me just share a personal story with you. I've been practicing, as I said, for over 40 years. Back in 2000, so I'd practiced 20 years at that point. My grandmother got sick. I was very close to my grandmother. She was sent home to die. She had 3 to 6 months to live. My mother had already moved in with her and was going to take care of her. And then my mom died, just unexpectedly, 2 months later after this diagnosis. And so I became a caregiver for my grandmother. And I had done a lot of estate planning. I'd done a lot of general practice. But what I soon found out was that I was ill prepared to achieve the goals of my grandmother. And so I took care of her. She was living in Fort Worth, Texas. So I oversaw her care, try to find services and like that. But I, as I said, was a little bit overwhelmed. And so after about 3 or 4 years, we actually started changing our practice to model the goals of my grandmother. And we brought in a care coordinator that would start working with people like my grandmother. And in fact, our care coordinator worked with my grandmother and I and provided guidance through my grandmother's journey. Now remember, she had 3 to 6 months to live. Well, that went on for 10 years. After about 6 years in Fort Worth, I moved her to Kansas and put her into assisted living where she did really, really well. So what were the lessons that I learned from my grandmother? First, she wanted to be independent. Secondly, she wanted to stay out of the nursing home in her own home as long as possible. Third, she wanted to be able to live the lifestyle that she wanted, and she needed to protect her assets and stretch out her assets so that she could care for herself and not look for help from me, financial help. And then the fourth thing that I learned is that as a caregiver, being that close to the situation, I got overwhelmed and I needed guidance and assistance. So we would sit down with my grandmother and design a plan for her. And then every year she'd change it. And it wasn't her verbally changing it, but it was changing because of her health and how well she was doing. To let you know, when I moved her to Kansas, she was on hospice. That was after 6 years of her care. And we got her in assisted living, and she got kicked out of hospice because she was doing so good. And she lived another 4 years. So you can have a plan, but understand it's going to change. So as I started on this path of elder care, what I began to notice is that about 70% of my clients, 70% of the families that were coming to me had dementia. And listening to their stories almost took my breath away. And so our office began tooling up to really focus on people with dementia. Our care coordinators got special training on communication and care skills and the like. Uh, I learned as part of the task force that dementia is the most costly disease in the United States. It costs more in terms of actual dollars. It costs more in terms of unpaid caregiving than any other disease in the United States. I also learned about high caregiver burnout. 60% of family members who directly take care of a person with dementia will die first. 60%. So that was a real issue in visiting with my clients, is how do we avoid that? And then finally, dementia care is probably the most complex of all caregiving. And I say perhaps because I know other people with other journeys have difficult times as well. One thing I want to add is a lot of times people that are dealing with dementia don't understand the course. They don't understand what they're facing. I had a family in just very, very recently, and mom has some health issues, but it's dad has some health issues, but added at the end of the conversation that, oh, by the way, he has something called Lewy bodies dementia. And so we kind of had to stop, step back a couple steps, start educating the family on what we're looking at, and be realistic about the time frame that we had with that family and with this gentleman with Lewy bodies. I will tell you, though, that my journey with my grandmother, my journey with my clients has been wonderful. I felt very fortunate that I got to take care of my grandmother for many, many years. And I think that a lot of times with dementia, just being there can be so important, but also having a plan where you as a caregiver are not destroyed. I want to, this is a lady that came to me from Southwest Kansas. There was quite a age disparity between she and her husband, not quite, it was 15, 17 years, something like that. But she was just in her 50s and her husband was in his 70s. And she was still working. She still helped take care of her daughter and her grandchild. And then her husband suddenly had this very rapidly developing dementia. So we helped her. We helped provide appropriate care, help her find appropriate care. We also were able to protect their resources. But I want to read to you what she said. Her name is Lynette. I want to thank each of you that came to my rescue. Mr. Clinkscales reached out to me and my family and helped with help that grounded me in my mental health and emotions at a time when everything in my life was coming unraveled. Your time helped the security and future of my daughter and my grandchild. Your services were and are an answer to prayers. And again, I want to talk a little bit, emphasize just the mental health and emotions, the emotional support that she needed during this critical time. So we're going to jump right in. The diagnosis of dementia does not have to devastate your family or your finances. So what are we going to discover in this? We're going to discover how to care for someone, how to care for the caregiver and communicate with someone with dementia, and how to care for yourself if you're a caregiver. We're going to talk about the legal planning you need to do because of a diagnosis of dementia or the concern about dementia. And then finally, we're going to talk about the ways to pay for care without going broke. So number one is how to care for and communicate with somebody with dementia. Again, the most important person many times in the room when I meet with a client is the caregiver. Many times they're the gatekeeper between the person with dementia and the nursing home. So we're going to talk about how important that is. We're going to talk about the tools for communicating, but I want you to remember that you're in control if you'll take control, if you get help. And so I want to build on what type of tools are available to you to get and provide help. Sometimes we battle a problem, a barrier in care called the promise. I don't know if any of you know what the promise is, but the promise is, I will never put you into a nursing home. So this is the situation that we had with Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So Mrs. Smith called and came in with Mr. Smith and their daughter Alice. Mr. Smith had been diagnosed with dementia, but he was still in the home. During the course of our meeting with Mr. Smith in the room, Mrs. Smith and the daughter Alice would argue with Mr. Smith, saying things like, "Remember, Dad, we've gone over this." However, Mr. Smith was at the point he could not even be left alone at home. He has something called sundowners, which means in the evening, he gets very active and sometimes agitated. And as a result, Mrs. Smith is not sleeping well. Because of the care that she thought she had to provide, Mrs. Smith quit her job and quit one of her social activities, a sorority. The daughter, Alice, lives many miles away, but she sees how much Mom is aging faster than Dad. In fact, I will tell you that Mrs. Smith looked older than Mr. Smith, which was not the case. So Mrs. Smith and daughter Alice expressed that they wanted to keep Mr. Smith at home, again, because of this promise that I'll never put you in the nursing home. But their solution was Mrs. Smith providing all the care, with Alice giving relief only when she was available. So what happened? So we brought in the care coordinator with the family after they hired us. We got Mrs. Smith back to work and back involved in her sorority, and we'll talk why we did that. We were able to find some respite care and some senior companions. And then we gave Mrs. Smith a lot of caregiver tips, particularly about communication. As a result of that, Mrs. Smith's health improved, and she actually had an improved relationship with Mr. Smith. I want to reemphasize this a little bit. It's important to have tools, but it's more important to actually use them. And sometimes we have to be reminded that there are tools, and you have to be willing to accept help, whether that's respite care or senior companions. So the comment from the daughter Alice was this: your help saved mom, and it allowed us to keep dad at home much longer. Plus, we saved thousands of dollars. And it was interesting because they really came in about Mr. Smith, and what we ended up doing was helping Mrs. Smith to take care of Mr. Smith. So let's talk about tips that we talked with Mrs. Smith about. Care for the caregiver. We told her, Mrs. Smith, you have to take care of yourself first. If you're exhausted, you can't help. You can't pour from an empty cup. Secondly, give your relationships love and attention. And what we mean by that is so many times, and I experienced this myself, when you're a caregiver, you go from being a spouse or a grandson or a friend to a caregiver and nothing more. And that's a real loss. But also, many times you lose your relationship with your friends, your sorority, or your church, or your job. And that's why it was so important for us, for her to get back to work. So she had her own respite from the care of Mr. Smith. Wanted her to watch for signs of stress. So what she was experiencing, several of them, including the sleeping problem. She was short, overreacting to minor nuisances. She wasn't paying some bills like she ordinarily would have done. So she was showing a lot of signs of stress. And so we talked to her to watch for those signs and then how to combat them. And again, part of it was to learn to take it one day at a time, that you can make it through that day. You have a plan for the next day. Get involved in some support groups. I know we work with our dementia support group, which is actually now meeting online. Exercise, going back to work was so important. So she was getting some exercise versus just trying to chase Mr. Smith around the house. And then finally, help others help you. So it's not unusual for, as people find out that you're taking care of somebody with dementia, they may actually say, hey, Mrs. Smith, is there something I can do for you? And what we urge Mrs. Smith to do, and what we urge with our clients to do is say, you know, I don't know of anything right now, but can I take your name? And then I can call you if something comes up. And then all of a sudden you have this pool of potential helpers. But don't be afraid to look at support groups. Don't be afraid to tap into your church, social groups and friends. It can make all the difference in the world, and it can really improve the life of Mrs. Smith. So we also talked with Mrs. Smith about communication. And we're talking about communication with Mr. Smith, because I think she was really, really frustrated with his forgetting, his not remembering. So we talked to her about don't argue, instead try to agree. Rather than reason, try to divert or change the subject. Try not to lecture Mr. Smith. Instead, try to reassure him that everything's going to be okay. Avoid saying, remember, or don't say, I told you. Instead, repeat or reminisce or redirect. Don't say you can't, but show them what they can do, what the person with dementia can do. Try not to demand or command. Instead, ask or model behavior. So say, eat your food. This is a good example. Eat your food, sit down and eat with them. So many times seeing other people perform the same act will help that person. Uh, don't condescend, instead encourage and praise. Don't enforce, but instead reinforce. And I just want I want to share with you some rules in my office. So we meet with a lot of families, and a lot of times the person with dementia comes into the room. I had that meeting yesterday. It was by Zoom, but I had that meeting yesterday. And the wife's got dementia. It's important for me that I and other members of my firm show respect for the person with dementia. We want to remember they're in the room. Even if they cannot verbalize, they're in the room. And feelings can still be hurt. The levels of understanding may vary from time to time. So don't talk like they're not there. If there's something really important that the caregiver needs to tell me and really needs to get into some details, we may have a separate meeting just by stepping outside the room so I can get those details. So if you're facing dementia and you're having some of these issues, what do you need to do? Well, we would like to set up a strategy session with you, and we're going to help you explore what tools are available, and we're going to help you find resources and start implementing a strategy right away. And we're going to do that in conjunction with some of the other issues that I'm going to talk about. One of the things I guess I want to pause here for a moment is that if you would like to talk to us or like to have an appointment with us, a strategy session, what we'll actually do is when you call in or send in the Survey Monkey, we're going to touch base with you and do a short interview to be sure we can help you with whatever's going on. And we'll do that before we actually set up an appointment, and then give you an option whether you want to go forward or not. So let's talk about the legal planning that you need to do because of dementia. And this is really important because I'm going to give you an example here in a minute. But what you need to understand, what I want you to understand, is that no one has the power to act for you unless you give them that power or a court gives them that power. So my wife does not have the power to do things on my behalf unless I give her that power. There's no one that automatically has that power. And so what happens if I lose capacity? Then somebody's got to go to court and get a guardian conservatorship. And that guardian conservatorship is going to be not necessarily in accord with my wishes. So by having the proper documents prepared, you can express your wishes, your individual wishes. I want to give you an example. I have in my healthcare power of attorney that if I have dementia and I don't recognize my family anymore, and that's permanent, then I actually restrict the type of medical services my power of attorney agent can get for me. That's not a right answer or wrong answer. It's just my answer. But you have the right to customize your wishes in your financial and healthcare powers of attorneys. So it's the essential, what we call the essential documents or the key documents include the financial and healthcare powers of attorneys and some type of estate plan, whether that's by a will or a trust. Sometimes we do living wills, and there's some controversy about that. generally we recommend people do it, but some people don't feel it's appropriate for them. And then we also want to do certain releases so that the healthcare professionals can talk with your family or whoever it is you want them to talk to. But that type of investment can end up saving the family thousands of dollars and allow you to preserve and protect assets. And so let me give you an example. And this is a couple weeks ago. So and let me just lay some background. I was actually on a conference call with a bunch of attorneys, and one of the attorneys asked if she could call me. And she was sitting in South Carolina, North Carolina, I don't remember which. But she called me and said that she had a woman by the name of Betty, who is the daughter of Mrs. Jackson, and Betty lived in the Carolinas. And she was trying to take care of her mother. Her mother is Mrs. Jackson. But Mrs. Jackson had had dementia for many years, and it was at home. She had had and the dementia was increasing. She had a recent hospital stay, and the hospital did not want to discharge her to any place but a nursing home because of the capacity issue. She owned her own home. She had a little bit of money. She had two daughters, Betty, and then her sister is a disabled person. So the attorney called me and we got on the phone, and I said, well, send me the power of attorney. And they did. They had actually been working with another attorney for over a year, but they had this very limited power of attorney. And that power of attorney did not allow for gifting. The family really wanted to protect the house for the disabled daughter. And there's a rule in the federal law and Kansas law that would allow Mrs. Jackson to transfer her home to her daughter, her disabled daughter, and not be disqualified from getting Medicaid. So typically, if Mrs. Jackson gave her home away, she would be disqualified from Medicaid for a period of time. But there's an exception if the home is transferred to a daughter or to a child that has a disability. As a result of this limited power of attorney, they're not going to be able to transfer or gift the house to the daughter, and now it's all going to be lost to Medicaid. And the key here is the family waited too long to take action. If they had had a powerful power of attorney, I would have been able to save the home. Now, I've not given up. I'm trying to figure a way around this dilemma. But and Betty is going to be a client, but her comment was, "We wish we had talked to an expert before." But again, I want to emphasize how important that power of attorney was in our planning. Let me give you a other side of this. So Mr. and Mrs. Lundgren came in to see me, I'm trying to think, just recently, a farming family. Mr. Lundgren has been diagnosed with dementia. Actually, they're calling it mild cognitive impairment, but he knows how to read between the lines. He's in his 60s. He's still a very active farmer, and he has capacity. But he's very concerned about what's going to happen if years from now he needs care. And he's concerned for his wife and his children. And so his comment to me was, I want to stay in control, but I want to be sure my wife and my land are protected. So what did we do? We set up very broad powers of attorneys for Mr. Lundgren. We then put all of his land into an irrevocable trust. We added Mr. Lundgren's care instructions to his healthcare power of attorney and met with his agents, or we're going to actually meet with his agents so that they know his wishes. What's the result? Though it may be several years before Mr. Lundgren ever needs health assistance, his goals are achieved through his plan set forth in his documents. His land is protected. He remains in control and can continue to farm. And his wife, we've given her power to further protect resources should Mr. Lundgren lose capacity. And one thing that's real important to Mr. Lundgren, he was able to describe in his healthcare power of attorney how he wants to be cared for as he continues on the dementia journey. And what's nice about that is it takes a lot of pressure and guilt off his family if what they're doing is just following his wishes. So what do you need to do to do something like Mr. Lundgren? If you're facing dementia, or if you're concerned about developing dementia, we want to set up a strategy session with you. So call us about that, and we'll talk about how to do that. Don't wait. I mean, the key to the success of the plan with Mr. Lundgren is that we acted while he had capacity and while we were a long ways away from ever needing to go on Medicaid or need any kind of government benefits. You need to act while capacity is not an issue. You need to express your goals in your legal documents, but you also need to empower your agent and caregiver to carry out those goals. Most importantly, just because there's been a diagnosis of dementia, there are a lot of solutions. You just need to act quickly. So now is how to pay for dementia care. And many times this is maybe a real important topic for people. So we want to, first step is, I want you to make the decision on how to pay for care. And so if we've got time, if we've got opportunity, then we can visit on how do you want to pay for that care, and we can give you recommendations on how to make that happen. But what I want to focus on with my clients is you don't have to go broke if you need dementia care. And we're going to talk today about how you can learn to use government benefits to pay for care, such as Medicare, VA, and Medicaid. So let's go through a couple of actual cases. So Mr. and Mrs. Johnson came in to see us. Actually, Mrs. Johnson came in. Mr. Johnson had a stroke. He had had some dementia before the stroke, but it was really worse after the stroke. He's in the hospital and he needs to be discharged. He's got investments. He and Mr. and Mrs. Johnson have investments worth about $500,000, and he's got a long-term care policy that will pay $200 a day for 3 years. So that's about $6,000. Let's talk about that just a moment. Long-term care costs now are easily reaching $7,000. I have clients paying $10,000. I have clients paying $12,000. But $7,000 to $8,000 is certainly not unusual. So Mrs. Johnson was concerned about how to pay for care. What if they used up the long-term care policy? How could they preserve some of the money for Mrs. Johnson and the children? They were going to discharge Mr. Johnson to a nursing home. However, we got involved and we had them discharge him to a skilled facility so that Medicare would pay for at least a period of time. We developed a plan for Mr. Johnson to come home. We tapped into the long-term care policy so that they could pay for home care and home improvements so that Mr. Johnson could stay in the home. And we were able to shield some resources because of the shield some resources from long-term care costs. So early involvement did 4 things. It got Medicare benefits extended. It got the health care improvements that Mr. Johnson needed so he could go home. He was able to go home, and we were able to use the long-term care policy to help pay for that care. And actually, it wasn't $200 a day. It was something less than that. And the nice thing about that is actually extended the length of the long-term care policy by not using the full $200 a day. And because he wasn't in a nursing home, we could do that. So another example, and this has actually happened about 5 or 6 times in our office. So Mr. and Mrs. Schmidt in their 70s, their goal was to protect each other. One thing that's not on here, they had recently purchased a long-term care policy that was costing them about $7,000 a year, and it provided about $3,500 a month in long-term care coverage. So they were kind of shocked at that, shocked at the limited coverage. Plus the fact they knew if they canceled the policy or if they didn't use it, they would lose everything they put into it. So Mr. Schmidt had about $35,000 in an IRA, $350,000 in an IRA. Mrs. Schmidt about $200,000, and they had investments of about $300,000. They owned their home. They had 3 children and 5 grandchildren. Again, concerned if one of them gets sick, the assets will be depleted and the spouse will be impoverished. And they want to leave money to their grandchildren. So one of the tools that we have in our toolbox is we showed them a hybrid life insurance policy with a long-term care rider and no annual premium, no annual premiums. In this particular case, we took $150,000 out of Mr. Schmidt's IRA and bought a $250,000 life insurance policy that has a $7,000 a month long-term care coverage. If Mr. and Mrs. Schmidt die and do not file a claim on that policy, then their family is going to get $250,000 when they die. If they file a claim on the policy, and let's say they use up $50,000 at a nursing home, all that does is reduces the death benefit so that when they die, they've used up $50,000, but their family is going to get the balance of $200,000 in life insurance proceeds. So the idea here for them is that they don't have the annual cost, and if they don't use it, they get it back. I thought this was interesting because this is not unusual. The Schmidts actually were brought into our office by their children. Their children were worried that their parents had not explored any planning, and I think they were a little bit shocked about what they were spending on long-term care insurance. So let's go one more example, and this example is using Medicaid. So this particular client, Lucille, it's a different Lucille, and Fred came in to see me, and actually it was Lucille again. Fred had dementia. They had actually moved to Kansas to be near family to take care of Fred. But Fred had progressed to the point that he can no longer be cared for in his home. The nursing home care costs at that time were about $6,000. The assets included Lucille's $100,000 IRA, a home, and a joint account of about $60,000. They were told by the nursing home they would need to spend down all of their resources before Medicaid would help. And Medicaid would then put a lien on the home. Lucille was also very worried that her husband would not get good care if he had to go on Medicaid. I will tell you, Lucille was very frustrated. She was somewhat, the system had really overwhelmed her, and she was really at her wit's end. Luckily for Lucille, she came to the right place. We were able to get Fred on Medicaid. We were able to be sure to monitor his care so he got good care. Lucille was able to keep all of the assets. We transferred the home over to her name, and so no lien was ever placed on the home. I want you to know that in this particular case, Fred was actually a wartime veteran. And if he would have been able to go home, we would have applied for VA benefits, which would have paid up to $2,200 a month. In this case, it didn't work out because he was going into the nursing home, and the $2,200 was not going to be enough to pay for his care. So Medicaid made more sense. So again, Lucille was able to keep the home. There is no lien, and she was able to keep all the resources. But it had to be with proper planning. So what do you need to do? Schedule a strategy session as soon as possible. Explore all the funding resources so you can figure out so we can help you figure out how to pay for care. Be sure and get strong powers of attorney and other estate planning documents in place, which allows us to continue on even if somebody loses capacity. And our goal always is to help you find, get, and pay for good care without going broke. I really like this testimonial from Pat. When I met with Pat, I just didn't know where we're going. She didn't want to be in my office. She didn't want her husband to have Alzheimer's. She didn't want to ask for help. She just was angry at where the world had put her at that moment. And we got to work with Pat for a long time. And after her husband passed away, she wrote us this kind note. My husband needed nursing home care. You guided me through the process. Your care coordinators made sure my husband was getting good care. I highly recommend you because you're always there for your clients and will guide them through everything that goes on. Things we never expected to go through. And I want to just emphasize that just a little bit. No one has, when they got married or they were a child, ever thought about having to help someone go through a dementia journey. And there's so many things that you don't know about. And Pat emphasized that. There are things that you're going to go through that you don't know about, but that's why we're here, is to guide you through that. And then finally, I want to share this one with you. And this is just a family we worked with for a long time, and she just wrote this note one time. It says, as you move into these stages of life, you need Clinkscales. You know what they have done for you is the right thing. Another Lucille. So far you've discovered here that in dealing with dementia, it's important to care for the caregiver, and it's important to have and use good communications tools. It's important to know and access community resources. They're not the same everywhere at all. they're different from community to community. And that's what we focus on, is helping you access those resources. There are very special, specific legal documents you absolutely need to protect yourself, your family, and your wishes. There are ways to plan for possible care cost, and the plan will protect your spouse, your family, and your assets if we do it and do it in time. You can pay for care with private resources, or if necessary, you can access government programs, but you don't have to go broke because of dementia. Let me repeat that. You don't have to go broke because of dementia. With proper care and planning, you can delay or avoid the nursing home, allowing you to stay at home longer, or allowing your loved one to stay at home longer. So I hope you get one thing. Proper planning with an expert directs you on ways to stay at home, to protect your family, and preserve your assets from the devastation of dementia. So how do I make that happen? So if the diagnosis is dementia, we have strategies for care for the caregiver, legal planning necessary because of dementia to protect your assets and your wishes, and methods to pay for your care. How does this work? Again, you call in, we'll visit with you, and then schedule a meeting. It's going to be about 60 to 90 minutes in person or by Zoom or by telephone with me or one of the others of our two attorneys. At that meeting, we're going to discuss with you the current stage of dementia and the issues you're facing. Discuss your financial and legal needs should your loved one require care. Review your current estate plan. Establish with you long-term goals. If dealing with dementia, develop a plan to keep you safe and in the least restrictive environment, and that will entail a meeting with one of our care coordinators. Plus, I'll answer all the questions you have about your unique situation. At the end of that meeting, you'll have a better understanding of the dementia journey and what steps are needed to be implemented. We will analyze your financial situation and show you how to protect your resources and pay for care. We'll analyze your current legal plan and show you how we need to improve it. To me, most importantly, you'll have better clarity of your issues and goals, and then we can design a blueprint how to achieve those goals. And you'll know the amount of the investment to achieve those goals. After our meeting, you'll decide to get started. And we'll schedule a time with one of our care coordinators if you're currently dealing with dementia. We'll start drafting a plan, and then we'll have another meeting to go over that plan and finalize it. Then we'll prepare the final documents to be signed by you. Then we'll be working together on other tools and steps such as titling of property, accessing community resources, care coordination, and the like. Before I go on, I want to tell you that after our last meeting, someone called me and said that I had described his family situation exactly. And he told about his grandmother taking care of his grandfather with dementia, and how she spent everything, she used all of her energies to take care of him until he passed away. And then she died 2 days later. And he said we had a joint funeral for the two of them. And there was no happiness in his conversation. It was just that she had worn herself completely out trying to take care of her husband. So we're going to have a strategy session. Typically that would be we would charge $650 for that strategy session. But because you've participated today, that strategy session is going to be free. Again, I don't know where my staff comes up with these pictures, but we have 6 spots available in the next 4 weeks, and I extended it just a little bit because of the holidays. We had it for 3 weeks, but if you want to book a strategy session, you need to call our office at this number, 877-325-8040, or click on the SurveyMonkey link that Emily is going to be sending to you. She may be putting it in the chat box. But my guarantee to you is this: you're going to know more after our meeting than you do today. You'll have an analysis of what happens if you do nothing. And you're going to realize there are options available to guide and protect you and your family, which is most important. And your time's not going to be wasted. Again, call this number, 877-325-8040, or click on the SurveyMonkey, and you'll get the information to how to contact our office. One other thing I want to give to you, because you're doing this, is I actually have a book called A Guide to Alzheimer's Care, and I've just been updating it. And then we're going to give that to you at your meeting, and we'll give you a written summary of our recommendations. So remember, you're going to get a free strategy session, an analysis of your current legal, financial, and care plan, a free written report to achieve your goals, and a book, A Guide to Alzheimer's Care. So Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you. I don't know if there are any questions or anything you need to add.
So it looks like there was one question asking us for some more information and resources here in Hayes, like support groups for caregivers. Could you talk maybe a little bit about where people could find that, Randy?
You know, I frankly would call our office, and I would talk to Jill. She's actually on the Alzheimer's support group. We've set that up virtually now. And so she can give you some information about that. That booklet that I have also has some information in it, Emily, about different contacts. I always recommend contacting the Alzheimer's Association as a good starting point. But again, Jill in our office would be a really good resource. Was chairman or co-chairman of the Alzheimer's Walk this year. And so she knows, she has a lot of contact about that.
Yes, Jill is a great resource for that. And then also on our website, we do have a resources tab where we have some links to the Alzheimer's Association and some other different downloadable materials that you can use. So like Randy mentioned, contact Jill, visit our website, or just call us for easy access to those resources and materials.
And actually, if they check on the SurveyMonkey, we'll have their email, and then we can actually, if you'll put your question in there, we can actually email you some other sources. And so we really need to know what town you're in. If you're in Hayes proper, well, then there are certain resources there. If you're in a surrounding community, we can give you some more exact information.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, if you have a specific question or would like to speak with Randy privately, please go ahead and message me now in the chat box and just let me know so that I can put you in a private room with Randy and one of our staff members, Tracy. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and talk about wrapping up here. Please be on the lookout for that follow-up email from us here at Clinkscales, which will include that link where you can sign up to receive your free strategy session. So please be sure to take advantage of that. That email will also include a recorded video of this presentation for you to refer back to, or feel free to share that with others. I did also put that survey link in the chat box so you can get a hold of us and get started right away. Like Randy mentioned, you only have 6 spots. You want to be sure that you really take advantage of the opportunity there. And lastly, we just want to really let you know that we appreciate your attendance today and want to remind everyone of our last webinar session in December. We have a presentation on the 8 things you really need to know for the second half of life next Tuesday, December 15th, with sessions at both 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. just like today. We encourage everyone to please keep an eye on our website, elderlawkansas.com/events, to stay up to date with our free online events that we host. Also, as Randy and I both mentioned, please feel free to call or message us if you have any questions at all or would like to use that free consultation. So with that, I will go ahead and thank you all for joining us again today. Thank you, Randy, for the fantastic presentation. It doesn't look like we have anyone that wants to stay on after and chat, so we will go ahead and end the meeting now. So thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.